Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1992, or at least the ones that I've seen. And I can now reveal, drum roll, that I have seen 22 movies from this particular year. That is 3 more than the amount I'd seen from 91. So I'm going to be ranking all of these films today, and just a quick reminder that the top 2 films today will be going through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for today, let's concentrate on 1992, and we'll begin with the movie that I consider to be my 22nd and therefore least favourite film to be released from this particular year. I don't hate Wayne's World, but part of my problem with this series is that I saw the second film first. So by the time I came around to watching the first one on TV, it felt like I was watching the same film that I'd already seen. These 2 films are very, very similar in my opinion. So yeah, it wasn't a great experience the second time around. I'm a bit more positive towards Wayne's World 2. I'll say more about that one when we come to it on a future ranking. But even with that film, I never really fully bought into the whole Wayne and Garth thing. You know, I didn't watch these films sat there thinking, oh, I'd love to live their lifestyle and be just like them and have this whole carefree approach to life. I mean, there are some humorous moments in both of these movies, especially the second one, but I never fully got into them. So there we are. Wayne's World, the first film, is bottom today. This is a film I saw on TV in the 90s. It's a drama. It didn't really do a lot for me, though, in all honesty, unless you've got some kind of vested interest in Northern Irish politics or issues to do with transgender representation. It's not going to do an awful lot for you. It's not the most exciting of stories. The only thing I took away from this film, really, was the song that plays on the end credits. I think it's a really cool song. Occasionally, over the years, I have gone back to listen to that song, but that's the only thing I get out of this film. The actual film itself, like I said, just doesn't do an awful lot for me. So, if you've ever seen the film Desperado starring Antonio Banderas, El Mariachi was basically the original Desperado. It was a low-budget indie film made by Robert Rodriguez, almost to the point of being a fan film. It was that low budget. But one of the big studios saw it, clearly thought that Rodriguez had something with this film, El Mariachi. They threw loads of money at him and said, look, remake this thing, but this time make it a properly financed movie with proper actors, etc., etc. So he did, and he changed the name second time around to Desperado. So that's how that film came around. I would not have known any of this but for the fact that at some point in the noughties, I decided I wanted to buy Desperado on DVD because it is a cool film, stupid but cool. And El Mariachi was bunched in with this particular release of Desperado. So I gave El Mariachi a watch. It's all right. I wouldn't watch it more than once. It's only really of interest, I guess, if you are some kind of big Rodriguez fan or just a massive fan of Desperado. I know there was a quote once from Tarantino who said that El Mariachi is good enough as a film to be bunched in with Desperado and Once Upon a Time in Mexico to form its own kind of trilogy. I'm not sure I'd agree with that. I think Desperado and Once Upon a Time in Mexico are streets ahead of El Mariachi, but hey, I'm not putting it bottom of this ranking. Well, there's 2 films below it, isn't there? So El Mariachi, 20th. This is the sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kid, and this one is actually my preferred film of the 2, mainly because I saw this one at the cinema when I was about 11. When I was a kid, I only really got taken to the cinema 2 or 3 times a year, tops, usually. So when I went, it really did feel like a treat. And as such, average films could be elevated if I happened to see them in the cinema. And I think that's what happened with this film. It didn't always work out like that. It certainly didn't work with Hook. I really hated that movie, as you'll know if you watched my previous rankings video. But I have a little bit of nostalgia for Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. I put it on for one of my own kids a few years ago, and I realised that I must have had the blinkers on a little bit when I'd been younger, but there are some funny moments in there with this. It's an inoffensive film, and I stand by my assessment that it's the best of the 2 movies in this series. I really don't like this one. I do like Batman films in general. I really liked the 1989 original with Jack Nicholson as the Joker. But this was a massive step down for me, and it was the same director. I don't understand what went wrong with this. There's two major flaws to the whole thing. Firstly, Gotham in this film doesn't feel like a real city. It actually looks and feels like the actors are on a film set. It should have been a great setting, having a Batman film in the snow, in the middle of winter, but it just looks awful. I don't know what was going on with the setting and the way they filmed it. Something's not right. Secondly, the Penguin, played by Danny DeVito, just does not do it for me in Batman Returns. I don't mind DeVito as an actor. I think he's done some terrific movies. He's great in Romancing the Stone and Jewel in the Nile and LA Confidential, a whole bunch of other stuff. I just don't think he was suited to playing the Penguin, and I never bought his backstory in this and all that business to do with penguins marching through the streets. What the hell, seriously? And we're still... Things would get sillier in this initial quartet of movies. We're still nowhere near Batman and Robin at this point. The only scene I like in Batman Returns is when Batman fights these circus goons in the middle of the street, but apart from that, it's really slim pickings in this one. Slim pickings indeed. Not to be confused with Ridley Scott's version of Gladiator, which would come much further on. From what I can remember, this is a film about a young lad of like 1920 who moves areas and then gets into some trouble with a local mob boss played by Brian Dennehy, and this kid ends up actually in the ring, in a boxing ring with Dennehy at the end of the movie. Am I off with this one? This is how I remember it anyway. But it's a pretty lackluster movie. The only thing that I can properly remember is that when they have this fight at the end, the kid goes to hit Dennehy, and Dennehy drops his head like this, and the kid's fist goes straight into Dennehy's head there, and he's like, ah! And I'm thinking to myself, what a move to pull in a boxing ring, just dropping your head like that so that the other guy hits your skull. Is that like something that you could do in boxing, or is it just not realistic? But at the time, I don't know, I just shook my head and thought, I'm not sure about this. It's not one I would recommend, put it that way. The fact that this has come above Batman Returns today is a real damning indictment on Tim Burton's movie, I think. I didn't actually talk about the first Home Alone film in my 1990 ranking because I had 39 films to sift through that year in terms of ranking them. I decided to just rank the top 25 in the end. Home Alone 1 was one of the films which missed the cut, so it did not get talked about, but I like the second film a lot more. Part of the reason for that is that I saw the second one in the cinema, so similar situation to Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, but more than that, I just thought the second film was better. I couldn't really get into the first one. I thought Macaulay Culkin was a bit of an annoying brat, but he won me round in the second one. I think because the idea of a kid being lost in a giant city like New York, that was a scary prospect to me, especially at the time that I saw this movie. I would have been about 11, 12, whereas the idea of being trapped in my own home just didn't do as much for me, really. And let me say that this is the last time I will be talking about Home Alone in this series. I have never seen 3, 4. What was the point once Macaulay Culkin left? And Joe Pesci. This is about a group of Nazi skinheads who get into some kind of turf war with Chinese kids in Australia. I think I've got that right. It's a long time since I've seen the movie. It's probably most notable for the fact that it was an early Russell Crowe film. It's very original. I think what mostly struck me about this was the fact that these Chinese kids, they sort of get their arse kicked at the start of the film, and then about 200 of them suddenly turn up to completely destroy the skinhead hideout. I did not see that coming. It totally changes the fabric of the movie, and then later on the skinheads start beating on each other. Russell Crowe turns into a complete arsehole. He's probably the worst person in this movie, actually. But like I said, it's been a long time, but I found it to be quite an engrossing drama. It's got a little bit more to it than something like The Crying Game, a bit more action, more edge of your seat. So if you've never seen this one, I would recommend it. We are starting to get into the good films now. I'm not really into courtroom dramas, but this one is elevated somewhat by a really passionate performance by Tom Cruise. He's not just impressive when he's leaping from one building to another, he's very good as well when he's just stood in a room doing a dialogue. He's really, really watchable in this film. You've also got Demi Moore back when she was in her prime. Kevin Bacon's in it as well. I think Kiefer Sutherland's got a small part, if I remember rightly. And of course, Jack Nicholson as the tough colonel in the box having to defend himself. The way that he gives himself away in the finale is a little bit unbelievable. I mean, all he's got to do is sit there and keep his mouth shut, and Tom Cruise isn't going to win his case. But, you know, this is a movie. He has to win in the end. I found this film more engrossing than I think I wanted it to be, actually. I think I was sort of, at the time I watched this when I was a teenager, I was sort of expecting to turn it off after a little while, but no, I watched the whole thing. I really enjoyed it. I think I've actually seen it a second time at some point since. Like I said, for a courtroom drama, it's actually pretty good. This is a slasher film. It has nothing to do with the previous three prom nights, so you are fine to go ahead and watch it in isolation. I think when I ranked the prom night films a while back, I put this one third out of the five. It's all right. I've seen worse slashers. I've seen better ones. It is way better than the prom night remake, which to my knowledge is currently available for free on Netflix. Do not watch that one. It is absolutely terrible. There's not much to say about the plot of Prom Night 4. It's about a group of young people who are in a house and there's a serial killer lurking nearby. He's an ex-priest. He starts to pick them off one by one. You're either into these sorts of films or you're not. This is my least favourite of the Evil Dead films, but it's still come 12th today. I've done a full review for this in the past. I think I gave it 2.5 out of 5 or maybe 3 out of 5. The reason why it's my least favourite is because it's the one in the series which leans the most into comedy. My favourite Evil Dead films are the original and the remake, i.e. the really serious ones. Evil Dead 2 is sort of half comedy, half serious, but in general I just prefer Evil Dead in the traditional woodland cabin. I could get behind another Evil Dead film that's set in medieval times if they're going to take it more seriously, but when it comes to Army of Darkness, I think I would only really enjoy it if I was watching it with another Evil Dead fan and sort of having a laugh with it. The thought of watching this again on my own is not actually that appealing. I guess if I was doing a marathon all the way through, I would give it another try, but Bruce Campbell puts his back into it as he always does. It's not a terrible film by any means. So from my least favourite Evil Dead film, we bounce straight to my least favourite Lethal Weapon film. It's still very good, it's still watchable, but I definitely think it's the weakest of the quartet. This one felt less hard-edged to me, and I think it did drop a little bit in terms of its certificate. I think the first two films were 18s, this one was a 15. And on the whole, it just feels like the whole cast and crew are sort of wallowing in their own success in this one a little bit. I don't like the romance between Riggs and the cop. I think the romance that he had in the previous film was a lot more sincere, a lot more suitable for the character. The villain is pretty awful as well, to be honest. But I want to finish on a positive and say that I can still watch and enjoy this film, but it is the weakest of a very good bunch for me. This is a film starring Bill Paxton and I forget the name of the other guy. I think it's the same guy who's the villain in Die Hard 2, Colonel Stewart, but I can't remember the actor's name. I think it's him anyway. I've not seen this film since the 90s, but I've been eyeing it up on Blu-ray for quite some time. I've got about 40, 50 films in my purchase later list on eBay that I mean to buy, and I just never get around to it. Trespass is one of them. It's such a good film. So these two firemen get hint that there's some gold in this abandoned building. It's set in the modern day. So they go there, but just as they get there, these gangs turn up and the two firemen get trapped in this room. And so for the rest of the movie, there's punks and gang members with guns circling this room. And the two firemen have got to think of a way out. And the film takes some unexpected directions in the last 10, 15 minutes. It's very exciting because you've got no idea how this film is going to resolve itself, and the two main leads are really, really good. And I'm looking forward to giving this film another try, actually, because I've not seen it in the longest time. I just got done talking about this one the other day when I did my Tarantino rankings. This is my least favourite of his films, actually, so the fact that this has come ninth out of 22 just goes to show you how much of a fan I am of Tarantino. This film blew me away when I first saw it. Over the years, when I've occasionally gone back to it, it has started to lose a little bit more of its sheen each time, which probably tells me that maybe I should retire from watching this particular one so I can at least retain what happy memories I still do have of it. I think he would go on to get much better in subsequent films, but certainly if you've never seen this film even once, then what are you waiting for? Because it is a crime caper, the likes of which probably you've never seen before. The first reaction I had after watching it was, wow, I've never quite seen a film done in that style before. It does have its issues with the script, certainly, but there was no way that I could put this below stuff like Lethal Weapon 3 and Army of Darkness. I went through a phase about 10 years ago of reading Tom Clancy novels, and I think I read about 7 of them. They're big books. I mean, every single one of them is like Lord of the Rings. They do go on a lot further than the point where I stopped, but they just wore me out in the end. But one of the 7 that I read was Patriot Games, on which this film is based, and I would say the novel is slightly better than the film, but it's close. It's not one of those situations where you say, oh yeah, the novel's way better than the film. I think the film, even though it does differ from the novel, is very strong as well. We had both of these films, I think, on tape when I was a teenager. I think my dad preferred Patriot Games out of the 2 that Harrison Ford did. I think I preferred Clear and Present Danger, but both very good movies. Ford is excellent as Ryan. This is the one with the Irish terrorists, one of which is Sean Bean. It's got a very exciting finale at Ryan's house when all the villains are wearing night vision goggles. It's top-notch stuff, and I actually really miss it. I've not seen it in quite some time now. So yeah, apparently I prefer this cheesy, simple action film to that complicated political thriller I was just going on about. So I'm a little bit embarrassed now that I put Passenger 57 ahead of Patriot Games, but that's just the way that I moved the films around on paper when I was putting my list together. But Passenger 57 doesn't do anything wrong. It is, I guess, what you would call a Die Hard on a plane. It's Wesley Snipes' cop going up against 6 terrorists. Sometimes Snipes is on the plane, sometimes he's not. There's a little bit of a Con Air feel to it, definitely a Die Hard feel to it, a bit of Under Siege. You know the drill. The main villain is very sinister from what I can remember. He doesn't like to be told that he's insane. Elizabeth Hurley plays a female villain, bizarrely. I don't think I've seen her in any other film. She's the only villain not to get killed. She's a woman, You've got to arrest her. You can't kill a woman. But this film is just good fun. I think it's a fairly short movie. I always remember watching this when I was a teen because we had it on tape, and I would have a good time with it every single time. This is what I should probably call a chef's pick of the day, because there's probably not that many people who would put this number 6 out of 22 for this particular year. If you've never heard of this film, you're probably wondering, what the hell is it? Well, it's a slasher film about an insane doctor who goes around just butchering everybody in his sights. He comes out with a funny quip every time he's killed somebody. It's a very, very well-made slasher film in a decade that wasn't actually that kind to horror. So if you're a big horror fan watching this list, get on it. It is absolutely worth your time. Another classic 90s action film. I can remember as a kid driving past the cinema. Well, I was in the back seat, I wasn't actually driving, and I looked up and saw the billboard with Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, the 2 stars of this movie, stood side by side. And I remember thinking to myself, whatever that movie is, it looks really cool. And of course the word soldier was in the title, which implied lots of action and violence and stuff. And when I eventually saw it, I wasn't disappointed. I mean, this is a film about a sort of black ops squadron of soldiers who are brought back to life by technology. The science is shaky. I mean, the main thing is we get to watch 2 action stars in their prime getting to beat 7 shades of shit out of each other more and more as the film progresses. I've never seen any of the sequels. Instinct has sort of told me to stay away from them. Apparently at least one of them is quite good, and it's not necessarily the second one either. I think Van Damme and Lundgren both came back for at least one at some point, but like I said, I've never gone there. To be honest, one Universal Soldier film was enough for me. And on we go to an even more classic action film, Die Hard on a Ship. What I like about Steven Seagal movies is just the way that he seems to go through them without breaking a sweat. I mean, he gets to the end and there's not a hair out of place. I can't watch stuff like this all the time when it comes to action. You know, I like to see heroes get hurt, get cut, a bit like McClane in Die Hard, you know, and his foot gets cut and he's dripping blood everywhere. I like to see heroes go to death's door and then come back from the brink. It's sort of inspiring. Casey Ryback, totally different breed. I mean, he marches across this ship just flicking villains over, you know. Anytime he gets into hand-to-hand combat, there's no fight. He's just way too good for anybody on the ship. It's like, push him out of the way, move on to the next bad guy. He doesn't so much as tweak a muscle in this film. It's different, I guess. Usually the hero gets some kind of hit or something, but not... I don't know, maybe Seagal just insisted that he would not tolerate getting pushed around in the same way as McClane or other action heroes of the time. But I like this film. It's got some great villains, especially this first one. Tommy Lee Jones, Gary Busey. There's that Irish guy as well. You're incredible, Ryback. It's just a shame you're not cooking for us. My Irish accent is absolutely terrible. We're starting to get to the films now that are unlucky to have not made the grand final, and coming next is the number 3 film, which is the unluckiest film today. Unforgiven is at number 3. I sort of wish this film had finished one spot higher. I think if I'd have put this through to the grand final, it would have made me feel smarter somehow. I didn't actually like it when I first saw it. I saw it when I was a teen. I'd heard really good things about it. People saying, oh, Eastwood's doing another Western. And I think I went into it with the wrong mindset. I expected more of a film like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And I don't know, it went over my head the first time. I was probably too young. Watched it again in my 20s, and that's when I really saw it a lot differently. It's just a very high quality drama film. There's lots to explore in this. Gene Hackman is just as good as Clint Eastwood, in my opinion. And actually, when you look back at all of Eastwood's Westerns, I personally wouldn't put it in the same bracket as The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I mean, that one is just miles ahead when it comes to Westerns for me. But certainly, possibly Unforgiven might just be Eastwood's second best film. I might be doing a disservice to some of his others by just throwing that out there right now without thinking about it. But this film is really awesome, and it's very unlucky not to finish in the top 2 today. But on that note, let's now find out which film is in the second position and will therefore probably, numbers permitting, be going through to that grand final. Let me explain myself. So if this was the theatrical cut, there's no way this would be in the top 2. That was the cut that I watched throughout most of the 90s. It was an alright film if you were an Aliens fan, but certainly nowhere near the quality of the original and the second one. But then they released this director's cut, aka the assembly cut, at some point in the early noughties. It was about half an hour longer, and for me, it made all the difference with this movie. It felt like it just completed the whole thing. Certain subplots now made sense, whereas they didn't before. It just changed my opinion of the movie. I went from thinking it was an average film to suddenly thinking it was a great one. I really, really like it now. I don't quite think it's as good as the first two. Who does? But I think Alien fans, or just film fans in general, are at two ends of the spectrum when it comes to Alien 3. You've got people who just think it's awful no matter what, and they won't go back and give it a second try, even with the new cut. Or you've got people like me who really like it now and put it right up there in that bracket with the top 2 films, but maybe just slightly below. And what also helped with my liking of this is the fact that I had the Alien 3 video game on the Master System when I was a teenager. I loved that game. You know, these little things, they just add to it somehow and make you more of a fan of a certain property. And also, when I compare Alien 3 to some of the Alien films that have come afterwards, this one's just better. You know, I can't believe that David Fincher won't talk about this film now, because it's had a renaissance as far as I'm concerned. That original cut, fine, you know, disown it, but this is a damn good film now. I think the world that's been created with this, the prison setting, the planet, I forget the name of it, I think the whole thing completes Ripley's trilogy perfectly, and I am quite pleased actually that it's going through to the grand final. But there is one more film ahead of it for 1992. Let's now find out what that is. I don't think I will get quite as many arguments with this one. This is one of my favourite horror films of all time. It has got a bit of publicity this summer with the release of the remake, although even people who liked the remake, I've noticed, still think that the original film is better. And yeah, I absolutely hold that line of thinking as well. Nothing can compare to the original Candyman. It didn't need sequels. I saw it for the first time when I was 13 and it just amazed me. I mean, it was scary, it was violent, it was a good story, an intriguing killer, heroine great, location was great, the music was just fantastic as well. It had a killer ending. It is, for me, one of the best horror films ever made. Absolutely in my top 10 horrors of all time. I think it will probably always stay there, but it was a very easy number one pick for me today. This comfortably ahead of Alien 3, as much as I do like that movie. So we've got Candyman and Alien 3 going through to the grand final today, but there is one more question left to ask. Only two. One of them is Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I'm surprised I've not seen. I've just never got around to it, but I would definitely like to. And the other one is a film called Hard Boiled, which I'm less desperate to see, but I've often heard it's a fantastic action film, maybe at some point. Although out of the two, I would probably say that Dracula is the slightly bigger priority. Right, that's all for today. Thank you for watching my video of my favourite films from 1992. I'll be back very soon with the rankings for 93. Until next time, cheerio.